Shechayim Beis, Volume 1, the middle of chapter 161, top of page 322. And this chapter and the previous one have been all about focused on the concept of mamutza, of interface. Interface, meaning Atzilus, the 10 spheres of Atzilus. The question was, how could there be an interface between two entities that have no commonality, namely Gvul and Bli Gvul, finite and infinite? The answer is that they do have a commonality. They're both divine. They're both divine powers. They're both parallel tracks of Ein Sof, one manifesting in infinite flow of energy, the other manifesting in a finite flow of energy. Not Teir. That Eir HaGvul, being that it's Eir, it's Me'en HaMoer, it's also similar to an attached and connected dvekus to the source. Therefore, the Kav, which manifests that energy, the Kav, which has in it the Sheir She'eris, not just Sheir, but the energy has in it the 10 hidden spheres, Shir Asmei B'Kayat, the God and vision. Therefore, it's like Min Kanaf, like the same material, the same fabric, the Eir HaGvul as with the Eir HaBli. However, it's a different track from the same fabric. Additionally, it also has a ration, it has an impression from the Bli Gvul, remains in it. As such, the Kav has in it the paradoxical qualities that it both can shape and fit into the containers of being a chesed and so on. At the same time, can also create an interconnectivity, scalabus, because it retains an element of Bli Gvul, so it still has that ability to unite them all. So we don't just have diversity, we have also the harmony of the diversity. And more specifically, this manifests in Atzilus. In Atzilus, it manifests that Atzilus is the place where all this becomes a reality, because higher than Atzilus is still in a state of stimulus, of concealment and hidden. And when it comes to Atzilus, that's where Afrosha, Atzilus comes from the word emanation, Afrosha, like a separation. A Yetzel in Ruchai, the Pasuk says that it emanates, or it was Afrosha means like it's separated from the spirit of Moshe Rabbeinu that went into the Skenim. So Atzilus manifests that. In the 10 hidden spheres before the Tzimtzum, it's still in a state of Pshittus, in a state of that element of Gvul. Eir HaGvul is still in a state of complete shapelessness and seamlessness. Even the Kav is still in a state of Bli Ma, without substance, 10 spheres Bli Ma. Same thing, the Esser spheres of Atzilus still retain, as a result, because they're rooted there, they retain an element of Pshittus. This is, in other words, suggesting that they represent the divine. And then they also have, on the other hand, and they have the impression from the Bli Gvul, but they also have, on the other hand, they are already chesed and gvura. God is already manifested. Like he said, liyes b'chinas chakim u'mevi b'chazim. So you can't say that there's no commonality. So as such, we now have a common denominator, therefore a mamutza, between Gvul, in other words, the 10 spheres, Chacham, Bina, and so on, and with Elikus, because these spheres are rooted in the divine. Then he went on to say that more specifically, this is two aspects in Atzilus itself, in the Mamutza itself. It's Chachmei La, Chachmei La is with the Gili HaKav. The Kav is revealed in Chachmei, just the point. There, relatively, it's still in the form of Bli Gvul. The point that's not yet shaped, and it can go in many different directions. It's flexible, like he called it. It's like Maya. Then comes a point in Bina, it becomes Rakia, it becomes solidified. Not like a liquid, it's solidified and defined. Chachma Tata, on the other hand, Malchus, is primarily containers, and that's the root of the Yah. And there's a sense of Yesh in its. It's not like in Chachma Kayach Ma, substanceless. There is an element of authority. There's an element of majesty and the authority of a king to lead a nation. That's why David was Bar Nafla. David was someone who was not capable of living on his own because he had that yeshus. And it was other Mauritian from Chachmei La that gave Chachmei Tata the energy, the bittul necessary. Now his yeshus is not yeshus in the negative sense. It's the substance that you need. Malchus needs to be an authority. So it needs to be able to lead the worlds. It needs to be there. It can be completely nullified. Chachma is not capable of being a melech. You need a melech to be a melech. So that's the Chachmei law that are informing the Chachmei Tatah. And specifically, these two levels of the interface are also Eris and Caleb. Which is the last thing we learned. That the energies in Atzilus represent the Blikvul, because they, relatively speaking, are still removed and detached, and still relative to the containers, are not yet fully tangible and defined. Even in Atzilus, relative to the containers. And then there's the other side. The Kalim, however, are the ones that define the identity of the structure. And hence, Eris and Kalim of Atzilus are in the Mamutz of Atzilus. That's the Mamutz. The Eris are representing, like he says, have his damus. They have a similarity to the divine infinite. The Kalim have a commonality, a similarity to the structure of existence. And that's where the interface works beautifully. But we have to remember that both the energy is not real believable. It's already energy that is Chachma Bina, but relative to the containers, it still retains its so-called ethereal nature. And the containers, too, of Atzilus are not as defined as they are in Biyach. They're not yet a Yesh. They don't yet have a sense of self. But they are, relative to the energies, real containers. So they're commensurate to each other. But now you have, within the interface, you already have on a subtle level, you have now two parts. One is a little, that is Oyer, and the other is Caleb. So you have a representation of both sides of what you want to create. Existence and the divine are represented. So we see that this interface works at many, many levels. At each level, one represents the higher, one represents the lower, and you need both all the time. Which means, even though it doesn't say it's obvious, that obviously you can go deeper in the Kalim itself. We're going to learn this previous Kalim, this Chutzenis Kalim. So there too is interface. Wherever you go, there is. But in broad terms, it's Chachmei La, Chachmei Tatah, Chachmei Malchus, or Eris and Kalim, energies and containers. And I discussed at length what the distinction would be between the container, the Koyach HaGvul of the container, and the Er HaGvul of the energy. So I don't know if I have to go over that again. There's definitely a key difference. I said the Keli is primarily, there's no Gili involved. Keli is like, the relatively speaking, on earth would be using a stone, and someone taking the stone and building a base of Mikdash with. The stone on its own is also a divine creation. God created a stone. However, it's a creation that has no revelation. It doesn't have direction or guidance. Nothing is revealed, just there. You take the stone, you bring it to the Beis Hamikdash. You make it a Beis Hamikdash. That's is informing Keli to be used for what it has to be used. In Atzilus, obviously, it's not a stone. Atzilus, the Kelim themselves are Elikus. But relatively speaking, its identity, as opposed to its identity of the structure, as opposed to the energy within it of what it's supposed to be like. A good example would be letters and ideas. The letters are Kelim. The ideas they convey is Eir. So relatively speaking, if you only have letters, it's also put there by God, but they don't tell you anything. When you shine the light in them, which is the idea, then you have Eir. So there you have this interface working in every possible level. Okay. So I'll just continue from the top to the bottom of page Chaval, and then we'll just go on to continue. So basically we're talking about Eris and Kelim. So he says, the energy also has in it Chachma Bina, we know, but the primary place where it gets substance, where it manifests in a substantial way, is in the containers. And also the containers of Atzilus, or the 10 spheres of Atzilus, are divine. We said, remember? With all the chapters we discussed, how they both, Iyuv and Gamui Echad is a different track, and Iyuv and Chayu Echad. The Iyuv of Gamui is one, but it's one with the Koyach HaGvul, as we learned, or it's one with the energy that's inside the containers. Whereas Iyuv and Chayu Echad is one with the Koyach HaGvul. But the Kelim are also connected to the divine. They're also one. The Gamma Kelim is under. They're also Elikud, they're also divine, but they're from the Koyach HaGvul, the power of God to create finite. Because like it says in Aved Sakeh. So let's again distinguish creating the finite and envisioning in the infinite light finite energy is not the same thing. Creating the finite is creating the paintbrush, the canvas, the picture itself. The actual images, the actual colors, and so on. Envisioning in your mind what kind of art you want, and a specific piece of art, is an energy thing. That's not the actual tangible characters. You can have the energy of what lies in those characters or in that image. That's not the same thing as the actual structure. Because, for example, you can have an artist who can think from today till tomorrow and have an excellent vision in his mind exactly what he wants to do. If he doesn't have actual instruments, doesn't have an actual canvas upon which to place his image, like a writer cannot put it in words, then it remains an energy. Yes, it's an energy that is now defined by a certain structure, but structure itself needs to be put into place. So subtly, the same is true in any level you go. So basically, you can say energy is how you are expressing. It's expression of the source. And container is the relationship with outside of the source. The putting into place something that's outside of the source. And obviously, you want these two to speak to each other, because that's the key. One without the other won't work. So, it's really the secret also of relationships. Think of relationships. You're communicating with someone intimately or personally, something meaningful. There's two things going on. One is your expression. Secondly is the person you're speaking to. And they have to be tailored to each other. Two separate things. Not just you about me. It's also about measuring the relationship in the context of Er and Kid. These are the two levels in the interface. The Er, which is in the state of Pshittus, simple, plain, simple, shapeless. How does that come away mitzad atzmei?
I think it's inside Etzem.
Usually mitzad the guy and mitzad
Atzma?
Usually. Let's see,
Which is different word.
That's it in itself.
Shittus
Self. Atzmi means
is
itself. Atzmi means itself.
No, it makes more sense to say mitzad etzem in itself applicable, but usually it's not how you make it understand. It's like
right.
I think it's that.
Okay.
that's
Even
it. The way mitzad atzmi,
Atzmi means itself, right?
meaning that mitzad itself, how the inner applicable is within itself. Not, Bakeim shem p'chinas gvul, and the containers which are in a state of gvul, as of erech hanevrayim. That's commensurate and proportionate to the creature, to the creation. And even though, so now comes the question the other way around. Good, Kalim of Atzilus is fine. But the Gvul after Atzilus, lower than Atzilus, is real Gvul. You're not talking about the true Yeshem Mitzias. It's infinitely distant from the Gvul of Kalim. The Kalim of Elokus is God's power to create a finite structure. Nevertheless, the Yesef Chinas Gvul is a Magdu As'ed, he is Be'erech. Nevertheless, the Kalim, being that they are Gvul, they are the finite manifestation of the divine power of the finite. So true, you can't compare them to the finite nature of this existence down here, because this existence is far lower and far more, far more removed from the source. But nevertheless, because it's manifested in Gvul, in Chesed Gura, you could say that it contains the energy that should make it commensurate and proportionate to Begeder Moked should become at least the beginning source for the creations. And I explained this yesterday as well. That as soon as Hashem says, God says, Asa Odom B'Tzalmeinu, Kinusenu, Tzelem Elokim, and God says, Mahu Chanan, Afata Chanan. That meaning that God has an element of compassion or tzedakah. You cannot say that our tzedakah, even as if it's infinitely distant, infinitely inferior to God's level of tzedakah, but we have connected. When a person down on earth helps another person, they have connected to the chesed of Elokus. That's because the divine manifested, first of all, in the Eir HaChesed and the Klei HaChesed. And the Klei HaChesed, Atzilus, at least confines the energy into somewhat of some parameter, which already allows it to become Geder Mokin. We have the beginnings of what will later become Chesed in our world. So true, it's distant. But you can't call it, there's nothing in common. It is in common, they're both called Chesed. And we say, Mahu Chan Nafata Chan. Just as he is compassionate, so are you. So we're comparing them. If God did not have a Chanan element, and he was just bleak wool, you couldn't make that commonality. You could say, God is beyond, but he wants us to be kind. No, but he also created that he manifests an element of kindness, and in Gvura, and in Chachma, and in Bina, and so on. So that's the eloquent steps necessary. How the Mamutza works. So the Kelim of Atzilus, therefore, are indeed representative of the Gvul of existence. And the Eiros of Atzilus are representative of the Blikvul of Elokus. Like we learned, like it says in the Geras HaKodesh, and we learned this before at length, if you remember that whole Maimer about this, chapter Kuf 153 and on, Maimer Pinchas. So he and his containers are one livrei to create. That means he's using the instrument. Let's just use them. Here's the visual for it, okay? The artist is one with the instrument that he's using, which is the paintbrush. Okay. So what do we know from that? That the kelim are on one side, they're chad. They're one with the divine, like he said, Elokus. But the other side, they are Gvul. Because why does he need them for? Why doesn't just God create with energy? Because the container adds something. What does it add? That using the container allows the energy to be manifest in a way that's commensurate. Why couldn't God be like an artist like this? He looks at the canvas and just a painting emerges. No, he wanted a paintbrush. He wanted a keli. The keli begins to create some definition. And with that keli, he unites with that keli. The artist takes the keli in his hand, and with that creates, which allows the creation to have a stepping stone to connect to the instrument, and through the instrument back to the source. Through the instrument to the energy, and the energy back to the source. Make sense? It would be the equivalent. Let me give a good example. I think it's a good example. The teacher, I was speaking about the Mittler Rebbe. The story of Mittler Rebbe that he had to find in himself that which somebody told him to be was correct, which is a sign of like the Eir. I was explaining that may be the example for the Eir HaGvul, as it's part of the Eir HaBlikvul, but it's already manifesting. The Rebbe could have just given him advice, right? Why do you have to identify with him? Well, he's a smart Rebbe. He's a Elokus. He's giving you advice. No, but he identified. It means that he had within him, you are within him. That creates a far deeper connection. You're not just relating to him as a Rebbe and giving you advice. He's identifying with your situations in a subtle way. But that subtlety already has a commonality between you and him. Right?
This is evil because man.
Yeah. But more important, this is you. No, I would say that's you and the Eir HaGvul. That's the Eir HaGvul. That's the Eir HaGvul, that Shir Atzmei, that going away from his infinite place that Rebbe, he's applying himself to a person, to the situation. But not just applying, he finds it within himself. That means in the Elokus there is actually identification with the individual entity called Chesed, the Gvura, or the individual. I'm just saying, one second. But let me take this a step further now. Now this teacher wants to communicate and say something to the student. Give advice. So he could just give advice. The Rebbe could have given advice, and he listens and writes again. No, but he does something more. He actually gives you the container. He gives you the methodology, the tools to go back and resolve your issues even on your own now. In other words, it's not just Eir. What he's doing is actually giving you the kelim. So you have not just that you have the direction and an answer, you're also getting a kelim and a method, an actual defined method that can work. And as such, as such, the relationship then with you and the teacher is far deeper. If you just listen to his advice, so basically you suspended your logic and you listened. But imagine he trains you how to think properly. You learn to think like he thinks. Then you're not just connecting to what he said, you're also connecting to his approach. So that's where the Kalim come in. So here's how it goes. The Ein HaGvul is what reflects that it manifests in some type of identified structure. The Kalim are like the instrument. The instrument is not just he's training you, like, look, a great artist can make a painting. And he needs the instrument and he uses the instrument, he's united with it as he makes the painting, as he draws. But can he teach you how to use the instrument? If he teaches you how to use the instrument, the fact that he has an instrument and there's ways to use it allows us to connect not just to his ability to be an artist, you're also learning his technique. So the Kalim, in other words, become, the way the teacher puts it in words, the way the teacher conveys it to us, allows us to connect to the idea through the containers, through the expressions, the specific containers that the teacher, the Mashpia, gave. You understand what I'm saying here? Whereas, for example, if he just was Mamshech, let's say he identified with you, Eir HaChesed, okay, identifies with you. But what's missing is, you're not in his place. You're in a distant place. How am I supposed to relate to the Eir of Atzilus, the Eir HaChesed of Atzilus? So Eir HaChesed goes into Kalim. God creates Kalim. Kalim are substance. Substance I can hold on to. Imagine the Rebbe gives you a wine in a cup, or he gives you the wine and the cup. Let's put it that way. If he only gives you the wine, you got wine in a cup, and then the cup doesn't remain with you. If he gives it to you in a cup, you can take the cup home. You can do something with it. You have something to hold on to, basically. There's a handle. I'm just giving you an example of where Kalim become critical, because they create the substance. They create something that's far more, like I said, a handle, something you can hold on to and contain, a container, and not just the energy. So there's several steps here. The energy is representing the source. And yes, the energy does manifest in a defined way. But the Kalim are what give it real substance. That's why that Shazal Idei Kalim said, Behemba Yodom, he created, which allows us to connect to that. So the Kalim hence become essentially a critical component in the interface, because they become the interface to the lower worlds. We learn the Kalim become the Eidos of the lower world. The bottom line is that in every level, you want to have two representatives. Like a good translator. Imagine a translator only knows Hebrew and barely knows English. What do you need him for? Right? Or the other way around. He knows English, doesn't know the original Hebrew. And then a good translator has to know the original. So Ir knows the original. Right? And Keli is the beginning that has an identification with the recipient. So you have yourself a combination. Two languages in one, so to speak. Of course, it's subtle, because you start dissecting it, the Kalim of Atzilus are Elikus. But there are Elikus that already give it substance, relatively speaking. Now he goes to the parentheses. V'ageres HaKedesh Sham Hiksha. The Ageres HaKedesh, there are 20. That's Simcha. He asks questions. That's Eichu Chadim Gamuri. How is he one with the containers? Yesh lemer kavanah. And we can say that the intention, the meaning behind what the Ageres HaKedesh's words are the following. Because by asking a question, how is he one with the containers, he's basically saying, containers are not God. So clearly, to say one is with the energy, that's not an issue. The energy is completely bought. The energy is completely connected. The energy knows all the time that it's a reflection and expression of the source. So of course it's one. Energy knows that it's one. But a Keli is already some type of entity on its own. It doesn't necessarily feel this connection, even though, so what exactly means Chad? What is oneness there? So he's explaining oneness there is not the oneness like with the earth. at the Yuchud of Yirvigam Echad, and that's what Alter Rebbe says. They're one he's one with his instrument in order to create. It's only in order to create. The oneness is not true oneness. He unites with it to create. Like an artist holds a paintbrush. Imagine you're holding a paintbrush and you're not really holding it tight. Or it's loose. It's not going to do the job. So you need to unite with your instrument, hold it firm. Not that the instrument is one with a hand, but it's becoming one at this moment. The energy, the vision of the art and the artist is absolutely one with the artist. It's his art. It's his vision. The instrument that he's holding is implementing it and is uniting with it as he's doing it. But at the end of the day, it's not one with him and can be set aside. That's what he's adding here. It's a major chiddush, by the way. So he says, the yichud is only what's related to, and the geya, important to, relevant to the creation. Not that the containers are actually one. Like the energy which is one, mamish, totally united with the Maitzel Elyon, with a higher emanator, the source. Because in a state of air by definition is bottom. Air doesn't have any substance. It's not a paintbrush. Air is an energy. Energy is completely bottle and subjugated to its source all the time. So this is something he didn't say earlier. If you remember when he spoke the difference in Iyu v'chayu echad, Iyu v'gamu echad, there he was talking that the chad is different, but here he's like making it far stronger. There he was saying, what was the difference in the oneness? He said there the oneness is that it's one as it's a product of. It's consistent with what he said there. We have to go back and look at and the unity with the containers is only the yichud that unites with them only to create through with them and through them. Like we learned before, chapter 155, which is actually where this is discussed, what I just referred to. So all the parentheses. So then comes the question the other way around. How does he even unite with the paintbrush? It's not him. It says, because at the end of the day, this goof, but this unity, even though it's like a lower, and it's only to create, this itself is because the container is also Elokus. Remember, the paintbrush was also created by God. And it's a power of Gvul of God. But it's a power of Gvul to create what this parenthesis is making the Mamutza and the interface of the containers closer to us. Because if it's Yichud, if its unity with the source was similar to the unity of energy, so we go back to square one. How then is it an interface? If the Kalim are united the same way, if the paintbrush is united the same way, the instruments as the energy is, so how do you say the energy represents the divine? The containers represent existence. So the general answer was the containers create a real Gvul, whereas the energy is not real Gvul yet. The containers are limited. But the problem is, fine, they're limited, but they're still too divine. So that's what he's adding in parentheses here. Their unity with the source is only in order to create. They have an element that is outside. They're already now a paintbrush, not a hand, and not the vision of the artist. However, the paintbrush is also Elokus, because it's the Keich HaGvul, God's power to create a brush, God's power to create instruments, God's power to create containers. But it's unity, not the creation, not the divine power. The unity with the divine is only in order to create. So the unity is only for that purpose. So what does that mean? Technically, it means that the Kelim of Atzilus play their role. Like, this container, all it is to fill it up with liquid, water to drink. But the container itself does not have the unity with the drink as you don't drink the cup, for example, but that's the drinker. But I'm talking about the creator of it. The one who poured into this. What he poured is much more an extension, a revealed extension. The container is necessary because it has to speak to everything outside the container. If you didn't put it in a container, I couldn't give it to you. So if a teacher wants to impart an idea, he has to put it into containers for you to receive it. So the idea is clearly one with him. What about the container? So if they say the container is one with him too, then you have nothing to do. So where's it an interface? All it is as an interface to give you the cup, but to give you the drink rather. But if I want you to be able to identify with the cup has to remain a creation of, it's a Koyach HaGvul, but it remains primarily united only with the artist as when he paints. But it doesn't have a fundamental unity because it's really there for the creation, for us.
Packaged goods. It's packaged right.
It's a very subtle difference, but I think if you think about it, it's a very clear difference. So I'm just trying to keep using the visual with the paintbrush, I think is a critical one, or like the cup. The cup is necessary to give it to you.
By the way, it's chapter 153.
This is 155.
That's when he talks about the Moichad.
No, but 155 is where he says what he says.
Uh-huh.
It goes for 3 chapters. Yeah. Zekov from Nezekov. But Eru Shabbat B'midah B'Gvul. The A is qualifying and explain this. The energy is how the divine is manifest in a defined vision. With parameters. Im Shai De'at Tzimtzum, according to the 2 opinions. Oi, that Midah B'Gvul comes through the Tzimtzum, but the air itself doesn't have Midah B'Gvul. Oi, Shekachu Gam B'Shosha, which is the opinion followed in 9 bays. And also in the Shosha Makeda.
The example of the Rebbe?
No. The example of the Rebbe applies to this, yeah. He's talking about the Ur now. The Ur has Midah B'Gvul. We learned before in the previous chapter. According to the opinion, the Ur is Pshutim. According to the opinion that they don't have, then the Tzimtzum creates that. According to the opinion that followed here, the Ur itself has it. That's Ur. Yeah. So in other words, as soon as the teacher has already envisioned in his mind what he's going to communicate to you, that's the liquid going into the cup. The cup are the letters he's giving you, the words. Now so the question is, so that we're talking about the energy in it is clearly an extension of the teacher. However, as the teacher, as he manifested in a discussion, he could discuss with you. It's not his belief, it's his gvul, but it's his er hakvul. The keli, on the other hand, is containing it and allowing you to hold it, basically. Allowing you to have a handle and to integrate it. So the keli is there, one, because as he pours it in like the paintbrush, it becomes an extension. He's one to create with it. But it's not one to the point where it loses its identity, and therefore we don't have what to hold on to. It's almost like if I gave you the cup, the teacher gives you the cup, and then the cup disappears once you drank it up. You have nothing to hold on to. If he leaves you the cup, so to speak, then you have something to work with. Because you have the paintbrush. He gave you here's the paintbrush, here's the paint. I taught you how to paint, now do it. I'm not saying that's exactly the point, but it's an example of leaving. So therefore, yes, when he gave it to you, when he painted and created it, it was one, and you, as used the direct instrument that was seamlessly flow with the Hu Gamui Chad to create. But there's an element in that still remains part of existence. And now is, so to speak, if there were no Kelim of Atzilus, we would have nothing to really hold on to. We would have like just the liquid, the Ashpa, the idea, the vision. We wouldn't have the holding on to what is Chesed. How can I hold on to it? How can I manifest it? How can I replicate it, etc. Try to find, there's a lot of examples you can give for this. Another example would be that the energy gives you the idea, and the Kelim is more like, think of a cutout. You know those cutouts that you're given, so you can then use it to replicate or paint on. Like to
Stencil.
Right, like a stencil. So the Kelim give us that ability. Here is just a definition of it. Yeah. So we have the two sides now. So now Kelim sort of like that. Now and after the parentheses. And elsewhere it's explained in another place, Shakelim Hemrak, because Kechamak. This is actually discussed also earlier. There's another opinion, there's two opinions about the Kelim. In Ageres HaKadosh, it's very clear that the Kelim are Gvul. So it's clearly Gvul. That's why there's a question. How's that one with Halakus? So his answer is, Shebahem V'Yodam, he creates. But there's another opinion which solves this issue with the Kelim. A different way. You know what it says? That the Kelim are not Gvul. They're Keicham. That's what he's saying now. They're only a power to limit the flow. The Kelim themselves are not Gvul. All they're doing is a regulator, so to speak, to limit the flow outside of Atzilus. Lower than Atzilus. According to this, we could argue then the Kalim are not really part of the Mamutza. Then the Kalim are just, it's again and lifting them. Geras HaKedesh, like he just said in the parentheses, the Kalim are one only to create through them because they're Gvul. But if they're not Gvul, then somewhat challenges or compromises this part of the interface. It's still it's still an interface, because the Kalim at least limit the flow, and the air would not be limited without the Kalim. Like we learned, without the Kalim would be Ein Seifnis Pashtuse. Chesed would keep flowing and flowing and flowing. It's Chesed, Eira Chesed. So we're going even according to the Shita and the opinion that the air has energy. According to the opinion, the air that the air has shape, the energy has particles. According to the opinion that the energy, the air is pshutim, that it doesn't have, and only the symptom creates gvul, then you could say, very simple, okay, the energy is gvul, and the container essentially confines it through chesed. But even according to the opinion that it's eira chesed, you could also argue that the container is not gvul. The container is now a pause, like remember Shaddai, ad potove. The container says, you're chesed, fine, but we need the flow has to stop outside of Atzilus. But in Atzilus, it's all gvul. That's, which would make it complicate a little what he's saying here. What the Mamutzi is trying to say is a true interface, because then it just carries over the question. So then, where's the interface? When it jumps to beyond, it's becoming real gvul. In Atzilus, it's only kecha gvul. So let's see how it goes here. That's what the Kalim do. That the reflection, that shatum, as it transmits out of Atzilus, then it should be gvul, like it says elsewhere. And now in the parentheses he adds, v'cheinu b'avedis HaKedesh. And this is the way, this is how it's explained in Avedis HaKedesh, the one he keeps bringing here. Remember Avedis HaKedesh, that kashem sheyesh l'kecha b'biltim al-gvul, kach yesh l'kecha b'gvul, and that's the kelim. She'enak keich ha-gvul. In other words, the opinion of Avedis HaKedesh is that the containers are just a keich ha-gvul. V'chein mashma b'pardes. And this also appears to be the opinion of the parents. But in Nageres HaKedesh, however, Kosher Shein Gvul B'Tachlis. But Nageres HaKedesh, he writes that they're Gvul B'Tachlis. They're not just Keich Gvul. Actually, he's not really saying this as a question. He's just saying it as another approach. But so I want to qualify. He didn't say it as a question. He's saying, what we said till now was according to the Nageres HaKedesh, the Kalim is Gvul, and Eir is Blipul. But according to another place, Kalim are not the Gvul Mamish, Kalim are Keich HaMadgul. But that still works as an interface, because it's limiting the flow. So let's just change the nigga. I would just say the first approach, that the Kalim are Gvul, is a little deeper interface from the perspective of the creation, because the Kalim are closer to us. According to the second approach, that Kalim are only limiting it, it's more lakus, but less commensurate to us. And according to that, there's no question. See, the Nageres HaKedesh's question is only if you say Kalim HaGvul. There would be no question. The Kalim HaGvul, the only limit, then you can't. There's no problem. He's one with his ability to stop the flow.
So according to Nageres HaKedesh, is more of a problem.
And that's why he said that the Yichud is only to create and not to continuously be one. But according to the opinion that's Keich HaGvul, it can be always one. Because all it is his power to flow, is his power to stop the flow.
Okay.
But the Nageres HaKedesh is obviously a deeper unity. And imagine the Nageres HaKedesh was written a few days before the Alter Rebbe passed away.
Is the Eretz always pshuta only with the Nageres HaKodesh, but not the other way?
No, the Eretz are always
not
relative.
not future.
Either way, it could be either way.
Yeah, either way.
Yeah. It works either way. The question is only whether the containers are just telling the chesed of the earth, stop your flow, your infinite flow. Or that it's not just saying stop, that the Keli actually is a confining force, a gvul.
If it's just Koyach HaGvul, why did they call them Kalim? I'm saying it's not actual vessels, right? It's just it's bringing something out.
Like this, because here's let's say energy is flowing, and the container is only stopping it, so it shouldn't flow further. Think of the container as being
It's like a Keli with holes.
A valve. No, a valve.
Yeah.
That's the container. Yeah, the Kalim there would mean valve, more regulator.
Oh, one's a roadblock, the actual horses, they put the metal, these things to block the road, and one is the policeman has the kayak to stop them from
It's very simple. It's an Eretz Kalim as an Eretz enter a Keli, and that's where it stays. Or the Keli, in the area of the Keli are really both in a way legal. But the Keli makes sure that no one else gets that flow. And you can find models for it in communication and relationships. I'm just thinking. Yeah, again, going back to teacher and student, there's two ways you can educate a student. You can educate a student that you and him are on the same level. And when it comes to other people, the student, like the teacher, knows how to, the student helps the teacher regulate the flow. But the teacher, but the student is still on the same level. In other words, the flow is only affecting others. Or the student becomes so proficient, they actually can go explain the idea to others in its full intensity without having to just stop. I mean, there's a ways to go. I don't want to go there right now. But think about it before. Therefore, Atzilus, both ways that we explained, being that it's kol, it encompasses, it includes within it, from both levels of energies and containers. The Lamail Atzilus lo yesh adayin kelim. Higher than Atzilus, he qualifies in the parentheses, is there isn't containers yet. Kim Atzilus. Now they're only in Atzilus, that's where the containers are. Mishum zen nikra Adam Dasiya. Because of this, Atzilus is called Adam Dasiya, the clothes, the macrocosm. It's called Asiya because there containers manifest. So now continuing from before the principle, okay, Atzilus Adeshakol, based on the things that come. Aidezel B'chinas Mamutza, and Ein Shafel Amabrayim. Because Atzilus has these two dimensions, energies and containers. Through this, it's a mamutz, an interface between the infinite divine light and the creation. That's in all the ways that we discussed. So there's different ways to explain it, but bottom line is, there are two elements that allow the mamutz. And the difference really comes down to how much of existence is there and how much of elikus. So it's a subtle difference between the two opinions. If kelim are only kerech hamagbil, you have less of existence being united. If the kelim are gvul, you have more of existence being united, but maybe the lakus is a little more diminished. More dinner b'tachteinim than obviously the kelim being gvul, and the kelim being only kerech hamagbil, only limited. Which is one of the reasons that the Alter Rebbe was machadish this in the Gersa Kodesh before he passed away, for Chavdal Tevis. Because there are Maimonim with Alter Rebbe, someone suddenly brings there, Maimonim with Alter Rebbe goes according to the opinion that Kelim are only Kerech, not Gvul Mamash. So it appears at the end of the Alter Rebbe's life, here on earth, he was being mechadish and bringing the power of the Yesh. The Rebbe brings in the Sikhs. That's because the same Gersa Kodesh also tells the power of existence. Basically giving us the ability to also elevate and maybe earlier in the Alter Rebbe's career, so to speak, the Siyas, more focusing on, because it's generally the case, more oil. Like with Yaakov Avinu. He said to Esau, we're not ready yet. The Kelim aren't ready yet. The Kelim have to be more refined. But like the Alter Rebbe said, France can't win because we're not ready yet.
Who can?
France in the Russian war. The Rebbe then says that was then. But today, after all we've done, the refinement, today we can also refine those containers. So you see the process is always one we use. So those, not one was right or wrong, it really can be down to which generation was it. There was more focus on then and less Kelim, so to speak. Or the Kelim are more limited flow, but they're not. Now they can be focused more on even on the actual Kelim. It's a good way to actually explain it. It's like stages in the...
You could still be frum and have luxuries in this.
Yeah, which we have. Imagine, basically, if you had luxuries then, it would have
They've
destroyed
gone nuts. Well, these,
even now it's almost
all these
pretty
little
bad.
Ruskies better went nuts.
Even now it's pretty bad. Even now it's pretty bad. By the way, don't make it like it's so great today. But it's what we have the ability to do so, yeah. Look, we're given prosperity. We're given comforts.
Here, Mike.
So,
Just go.
Dress and drive our cars and still learn to see this in the morning and be happy about it. The dual existence.
We miss it. Just
let's continue here. That's the mamutza of the two things. You know, the Inyan Hamtsoy, but basing on it. I was explaining something he already addressed earlier, but it's like tying it all together. A very fundamental chapter is this, these last two words. Kuf Samach 160 message from one. Mark it down. It's an important reference point. This Hamtsoy is in two things. What is the role of this interface? What does it accomplish? Two things. Lias Yishavas and Ephraim, that there should be the creation of creatures. So that's specifically through the air, the energy of Atzilus, through the containers. That's the Geras HaKodesh. The Fishay Savas is Dafka Ma'er Hadovik Mekere. Because the other way around, remember we said, what do you do with a paintbrush if you have no energy, if you have no vision? You stand with it, it's nothing. So you need the energy in the Fishay Savas Hadovik Mekere because it's attached to the market. It's reflecting the artist's intentions. Like it says in the Geras HaKodesh, that same Geras HaKodesh, Chof, Malkamachar, and elsewhere, another place. That's one thing that accomplishes. So the air is creating, but it's through the instrument that it creates. So for Yisavas, you need, that's what the first role of the Mamutza. Got it? The second role of the Mamutza, Gam B'Bnei Liyas Yediyas Elikus Be'elamos. That's Mamaylamata, creation. And now for us to travel backward. And we, on the other end of it, should be able to, that's why I was using the example of teacher and student, that we should be able to retrace the steps and that there should be ideas of that the world there should be awareness, knowledge, a knowing, a discernment, a recognition, the know godliness. Because if you don't have that, if you don't have the mamutza, there's no way back. Like the partis, right? Through Atzilus, Yedim, Hanivroim, Elikus. Through Atzilus, the creatures know about godliness. Gam, Mibchinas Enes Shal Malmatzis. Also, the levels of Enes Shal Malmatzis. Remember, we spoke about Mispah, the Sipur? It doesn't just tell us the story of Atzilus, right? The Srila. It also tells the story of above Atzilus. Learn this at length. I want to answer a very fundamental question in a moment. Like we learned before, chapter 6, that in order for creatures to have a knowledge and awareness and a comprehension of the divine, and a feeling for the divine, that's Chachma Bina. Yediyah Nasog is Chachma Bina. Midas is a Degesh. So that's Chachma Bina of Atzilus. Chachma and Bina gives us Yediyah Nasog, a knowledge and a comprehension of the divine. Midas of Atzilus give us the feeling. Everything's from Atzilus. So here's the question. What's the point of the first thing? God needs Atzilus to create. He doesn't need it. We said the whole thing is because of us. So the second reason is understandable. To know God. To feel God. But what's the first reason? The answer is also pretty obvious. God doesn't need it. But for us to know God, we need to understand how God creates. So the first thing is really also for the second thing. So God, in other words, if He had only the second thing, then you would have, okay, I know God, but I don't know God because I don't know how His process works. So God's process actually works in a way that we can understand it. So He manifested in a way that makes sense. It would be like, you suddenly see a piece of art, there's no paintbrush, there's no paint. God said He wants a world, there's a world. Okay, great, what are we supposed to do now? And how are we going to have, what are we going to be and what? What are we going to know? So the first thing and the second thing are really tied together, obviously. It's not just that God needs a paintbrush to create. Atzilus is a mamutza that helps us understand this obvious, and that helps us understand godliness, obviously. So there's probably two different things here. There's knowing how God creates, there's the creation of existence, and there's a structure and a systematic way that we can then relate to or emulate, and then there's the understanding of God, which of course is even further than just understanding how He creates. Remember, Yediyah, of course, is Aliyah, it's even higher than that, it's even higher than creation. So Atzilus serves this role from both sides. This means, through the energy of Atzilus, you see, there's a midah v'gvul, there's a measure and a parameter commensurate to the worlds. V'hainu ha'elam sh'lamaylam atzilus v'elam atzilus. I think I read it wrong. This means through the through the fact that the Atzilus is in a state of midibul elements. That the state of energy is in a state of parameters compared to the world. What he means with the elements means the element is higher than Atzilus. Remember we said midibul of the air compared to the world's
on the way back up, basically.
Yeah. So he means it becomes midibul of the elements. He means ein element shalamal atzilus ve'elam atzilus. Probably this is a lesson from a minor.
That's the aura of Atzilus.
In other words, the air of Atzilus is midibul compared to the air to the levels higher than Atzilus. That's what means the erech elements. By their kalim through the containers and the pool b'tachas be'erech biyah.
The others are l'fi'erech what's above it. But why does it say middle gvul?
Because they're coming down. They're part of the mumutza. They're manifesting the feet, as you said, in a defined structure. And the kalim are gvul b'tachas be'erech biyah, and the kalim are gvul b'tachas the limit.
Oh, I get it.
Relative to biyah, they are kalim. Nimshach ha'ara l'kuz gam b'biyah l'yes ha'kapon b'diyas v'asogos l'kuz. So therefore, through the containers, there's drawn down the reflection of the divine, also biyah, that there should be at least a knowing and comprehension of the divine.
Is this the lower chachma that you're talking about?
I don't know. I'm not even thinking about it. I'm trying to understand this without connecting. He's summing up the whole picture. He's saying like this. Interesting. He says midah v'gvul by the air and gvul b'tachlis by the kalim. However you explain the kalim, hold on, goes like this. The whole mamutza works like this. There's air applicable, real air applicable that is beyond. You cannot connect to that on your own. That air applicable shir ba'atzmei, visioned and estimated within himself a particular vision of 10 spheres. That's 10 hidden spheres, that's air. Then there's the containers, actual creation of containers. Either that they're actual gvul or what's called koyachat. That limits the flow. Now this air gvul now, is already set up now to begin to connect. The air gvul is part of the divine. So you have a commonality with real holocaust. The kalim are now representing koyachat gvul. And either, as I said, they're actual gvul and then they're only one through creation. Or they're koyachat gvul. Either way, they are representing their lefiyerech ha'elam is biyah. They have a commonality with biyah. So we have that Eir HaGvul has a commonality with Eir HaBlikul. It also has a commonality with Gvul, because it's Chesed Gura. However, more specifically, the Eir HaGvul represents the divine part, and the Kalim represent, that was what he said, the Protis, more specifically, represent creation. So now he's saying, how does it work now? So how does it work? That the Eir HaGvul brings us the vision in the shape and form of Chesed and Gvul. So compared to the higher worlds, or Eir HaBlikul, it's Midah V'Gvul. But it is, as we said, one and with Elikus. When that comes into the containers that are either Koyachat Gvul or Gvul Mamish, they're able to now bring a knowledge of godliness, because the containers are now carrying the energy of the Eir HaGvul that brings the energy from higher in a manifest way. So we're able to have knowledge. If the air was not Eir Gvul, How could we know God? The Kalim don't give us knowledge. Kalim are just, as we said, substance. They're dead. They don't have consciousness. So you have to have the air, is that the air gives us awareness of what is Chokhmah, what is Bina, what is Chesed. The Kalim allow for Biyah to understand it, basically. The hands that I described. That's what's going on. So the teacher, as a bleak element, he chose to manifest in a certain way. He then created instruments, and then he connects with and gives this to the Mekabel, Biyah, so they get through the instruments, through the containers, they're able to relate to the airs of Chokhmah Bina, which connect them back to the Elikut. So you have it working. We have enough interfaces to make it work. If there was no air Gvul, we'd have a place where you jump. You could not create an interface between Gvul and Gvul, like you said. Here we have that interface. Then we have more specifically the interface between energies and containers. That's what he's saying. However, the knowledge of Biyah, the knowing of God of Biyah, even though, yes, this interface allows us to know, but it's Yidiyas HaMetzias, you only know of its existence. We learned earlier, Metzias HaMuhus. Metzias, you know that it's there, you haven't seen it directly. Someone tells you that a few minutes ago somebody was here, now they left. So you know that person exists. Yidiyas HaMetzias, no problem. Liyas, the Masha Boba Atzilus L'Biyah, De'am Tzos Atzilus. Why? Because that which comes from Atzilus to Biyah, from the divine dimension of the Eretz and Kelim of Atzilus to Biyah, to lower through the interface of Atzilus, Al Pi Maimer Kav Hamida, he's bringing that back, according to the Maimer, according to the Erikt, the dictate of the line that measures, which regulates the flow. It's only an air, an energy that is an outgrowth, a derivative, as we said, because it comes after the parsa, after the curtain. So yes, Atzilus is an interface, but it doesn't give you exactly what you have in Atzilus. It gives you a filtered and veiled understanding and knowledge of God. Because there's, and that's why the knowledge, the awareness is only the existence of the divine. And even that, even the knowing the existence is also not actual total awareness or knowledge. That we should know, literally know the existence of the divine. Because all our knowledge of the divine and divine is only from the creatures that he created. Which means from God's actions, from his fullness, we know the divine. And therefore, as much as we'll negate the chumri, the crassness, and the yeshus, and the ego, and we will bind ourselves to the subtlety and to the spirituality, the etherealness of the subtlety of spirituality. We will not know virtually, literally godliness, the existence of godliness. A very interesting piece here. Speaking personally, like you're saying collectively. As much as we'll negate the chumis and attach ourselves to it, we won't know mamish, the God, the existence of God. Here's interesting qualification. We only know the existence of spirituality. But not the existence of divine. This I never saw. So in other words, we relate to a spirituality that exists, but not to the divine aspect.
You have to figure out how to go retrograde against the parsa.
Yeah, this is a war. Yeah. What's that? Ki'im. Except the Shamas HaGavois, great, high, exalted souls. Ubafrat Neshamas B'Atzilus, and specifically the souls of Atzilus, Yedim Metzias Elikus. They know the existence of Metzias. We're not even talking about Muhus now. Avol Stam Neshamas, but plain souls. Stam. Einim Yedim do not know. Gamas Metzias Elikus. That's interesting.
They don't even know
We should
Metzias.
say this, huh?
They don't even know Metzias Elikus. What the hell do we know?
Ruchnius.
No, Metzias is...
Gamas Metzias Elikus. Mamish. Also the Metzias of the Kuzmamish,
It-
literally. And nevertheless, through knowing the existence of the Spirit, we also know the existence of the divine. He's doing the, I'll explain, he's dissecting it in detail. What do we know exactly know, what we don't know? Not an actual knowledge, only a type of estimate. We have an estimation of it. By the Torah mitzvahs, through Torah mitzvahs, we have real, true, divine revelation. The general knowledge,
So not the
creations and godliness is through the interface of us.
not the Torah mitzvah aspect that he just mentioned. The last line is not the Torah mitzvah aspect that he just mentioned.
Without Torah mitzvahs, yeah.
It's through Atzilus, and it's only Yediyah Ruchnius, and it's
through Yiddichus you come to this. There's a
it's
lot
not
to say.
Yediyah Mamish.
There's a lot to say here. We have to begin from the beginning. The first thing he said was that all our knowledge of God comes through existence. We have no other knowledge. What other way of knowing God? We observe existence. We study existence. Or even better, you could say, we are part of existence. So why is it that, what do we exactly know about God in this, if it's not through His creations, His creatures? Which is an interesting statement. What does that mean exactly? When we look at the trees, the forest, the fish, the birds,
Because
the sky.
physicality is the only reality that we have.
So let me talk it through 1 second.
Okay.
It seems to me he means through existence, not just, it doesn't mean physical animals or creatures. That existence, what other way do we know it? It doesn't say observation of existence. The word he uses is
Shekol Yediyah Seinu Balakusum and Avram Shnivru.
Avram Shenivru. The Pulesa, that's the parentheses, it's a critical point. In other words, we know God through His actions. So we look around at when a person comes to an awareness that there's something greater than this table and chair, that there's something beyond the five senses. Where does that come? Where does that come to us from? He's saying that it comes from God, from the Pa'ulis, from the God's actions. So how much can you know about the Poil, from this Pa'ula? How much can you know from a person who's built the container? How much can you know from the container about the builder of the container? That right away creates a major limitation. Who knows? If you suddenly saw a little object on this table, someone say, tell me, who made it? What is he like? All you can say is that I know that he exists because it didn't make itself. I maybe can figure out a little about how he exists, but take away Torah mitzvahs. Nobody tells you what God is like. How could you know? Even a human being, you wouldn't know. Right? If I gave you tomorrow a clock, a watch, forget about that. You don't need to watch anything. How much could you figure out about the maker without any special interventions?
Yeah, but
Purely almost like a regular soul, just through observation and through imagination. So look, we have people who did not have Torah, and they also came to great understanding. But they came through it also through observing, through process of elimination. They realized existence cannot make itself. So you have to say there's something beyond it. And they came to a certain extrapolation. But at best, it's a metzias. That's what he's saying here. At best, you know that it exists. No one's seen God. You've not seen the Maker. Through His actions, you're extrapolating and you're coming to an understanding. He's going further and saying what you're really coming to understanding is that there's a spirit within existence. You're not really coming to understand the one who placed the spirit. In other words, from the container, you come to understand the energy within this must be enormous. Because whoever put this here, how much do you really know about the Lakus part?
So it's less
You know
than
the energy.
So he's trying to show it's less than Metzias, really.
Right. In other words, in Metzias itself, we know the spirit that invested by the existence of the Creator in existence. That's how I would read this the first place. And so it's totally fine. It's not, actually it's very refreshing to hear this, because it gives you a real good sense of, because that's a good question. Now, when God says, Ata hareis ladas Torah, I've revealed myself to you. I'm teaching you something about me. It's a whole different thing. The Torah is revealing things about God that we would never have come to on our own.
That's fine because the
He's
Torah
not
is God.
elaborating yet, but that's where he's going to be going. That the Torah has that power. That's the Chiddush of Torah. Go back to Kaf Hamida. How much can we understand of God if there was no Matan Torah? Based on our own tools. The others, okay, they were higher souls, whatever, but how much can one really climb with pure observation? You have nothing to read. I'll tell you, the wisest person on earth is created in the time of Adam Arishon, and he has no revelation. Where is he? How far would he go? And we're talking about, as he says, even as much as you will negate the crassness of existence, materialism. Money doesn't matter, covet doesn't matter, the yeshus, ego. Pure person, take the most purest, refined person, how far can he go in transcendence?
That there's a creator.
Without hearing a teacher, without learning from masters or prophets or no revelation.
That something created it.
No, that something put it here, that's Metzias, the lowest level.
That,
But what is he like? Mahus B'Shona. But even Metzias, what does he know? He knows about God, or he knows that there's a spirit and energy in existence. It's not the same thing. He doesn't necessarily know godliness. He knows the spirituality, the energy within it. Look, if you found a machine, okay, you don't know what it is. You start studying it, and you realize this machine works. There must be an energy in it. There's a ruchnis in it that you don't see with your eyes. Right? The spirituality. But the godliness within it, so to speak, what put the spirituality, where it's coming from, on your own, you can speculate. Again, God didn't put a neshama in us. We're not talking all these things. We're talking about even that one has to wonder, because that's a question. Let's say without Torah, we have a soul inside of us, and our soul has maybe a sensation. He's not mentioning that here. It looks to me like he's talking really just a regular human being without any additional information or data. It's a fascinating question, no?
The question is that you're talking about a being that completely refined himself, so it wouldn't be a male or some sort of...
Well, no, he's going to reach a...
completely non-egotistical,
That's what he said. No, I'm saying. So, that's what he says.
That's what I'm
So
saying.
as much and he attaches himself to that, he says, he will not know Elokus Mamish. He will know Ruchnis, but he won't know Elokus Mamish. I understand why, because unless God revealed himself to him, how would he know Elokus? I'm not talking about Elokah. In other words, he knows the existence of a divine energy, but he doesn't necessarily understand the existence of the divine. Existence, I'm not talking about personality. No. Yeah, it makes sense. It's not, you dismiss it, you make it sound like it's nothing.
No,
Think for a second.
not at all. But he's saying...
how would he know of anything else?
It's bit of Messias, a bit of a yesh, according to him. There's nothing... I think that everything would come in at that point.
Why?
It's empty, completely
Unless
empty.
God wants to.
Unless God wants to.
That's another story.
But this is the way it was set up.
No, but he doesn't. We're not talking about if God wants to. That's Matan Torah. That's what God wants.
Uh-huh.
If God doesn't want, you get what you get. You get you'll find certain stuff. But my question, look, after the fact that God wants, obviously changes everything. He's talking here purely how much we would do on our own without any revelation. I'm telling you, don't revelation. It all depends how much God embeds. That's the answer. No, it's not because we have the ability to reach there. It's because God embedded something. So if we divest ourselves, we'll get there. I understand what you're saying. Of course, he's saying here basically without any effort on God's part, so to speak. Take a human without any other tools except your own basic tools. Look, at the end of the day, you could say we were created in the divine image, so we already have divine tools within us, and so on. I guess he's speaking here almost devoid of any additional assistance. That's really what
basically logic itself.
Logic, human logic, yeah. But you could say human logic God also created, and in it is wired also understanding God.
Okay, but you have, but with negating, with the power of negation, you have.
I would
to
say you have
that
without any revelation.
Slila.
That's what he says.
Yeah. That's a good question what God embedded, because you could say, yeah, but that's why I give
No.
an example of an object.
Al Kain Kamash
A
Nishla.
brilliant artist creates something, a brilliant engineer. You're going to know that he exists. You may know some of the energy that he put in it, but you're not going to necessarily understand the mamish existence of the engineer, because you've not met it.
Even technique you won't know.
Well, maybe a little. I mean, there's things you can derive.
Right.
Okay, we'll talk about it some more. This is a very interesting piece. We got to review it. It's fascinating. Very, very interesting. Rashab really. See, the interesting Neshamas Gavoyas. What does that mean? If you're ready to bring Neshamas Gavoyas in, that means that they do have a power from above. So how does that? That's what I'm also. The Neshamas Gavoyas means that God gave them a higher soul. So of course they're going to have a better understanding.
Right.
So what's the qualification? How could you compare apples and oranges? He's talking that you can't really get to. It's only high souls.
No, you could compare because they also find themselves on this earth.
I guess. Interesting qualification. Because if they're already high souls, then they are getting something. Neshama staff.
Maybe they're high souls because besides, he's also he shows like Avram, the Alvos were able to get to high levels because the Eibishter gave them knowledge that he didn't give anybody else to Matan Torah.
Yeah. I have to think about it. Okay, we'll stop here.
And 38. And 38.
Yeah, we'll stop here. I'm gonna think about this. So we did the end of chapter, 161, page 322. We're supposed to finish the Matis Minor, the summary. Stop here at the bottom of page 322.